Danny Wettrich is a venture capitalist, chairman and CEO with Greenbank, and has over 30 years of experience in merchant banking and capital markets. Danny, thanks for joining us today on Let's Talk Bitcoin.
My pleasure.
In December of 2013, one of your projects, Greenbank, as we mentioned, spun off a pair of investment vehicles specifically targeting Bitcoin. What were you trying to achieve with these, and do you feel like you've accomplished it, or do you feel like you're going to accomplish it?
We do believe we're going to accomplish it. We have yet to spin it off. It's an objective of ours. What we've done with Greenbank, which is an investment company publicly listed on the CSE with the symbol GBC, we've announced two subsidiaries, one called Bitcoin Canada and one called Bitcoin Angel Capital, and they will be investing in the Bitcoin space. So we are the first public company in the world that's investing in Bitcoin. Bitcoin Canada will be investing purely in Bitcoin as a long-term investment play. Bitcoin Angel Capital will be investing in small Bitcoin startups. There's a lot of money going into the Bitcoin space at the end of last year from the Silicon Valley venture capital guys, but we feel that a better way to do it is to incubate these small companies and help them go to another level. I don't think they need $25 million if they're a couple of kids with an idea. What they need is some guidance and some incremental capital to feed their business plan. That's the kind of approach we're taking.
Many of the people that I speak to in cryptocurrency kind of start with a problem, and then it gets solved by cryptocurrency, and so they build something around cryptocurrency. But what you have is you've got a structure, Greenbank, that was already in place before you were interested in cryptocurrency. It has seemed to me that many legacy players, many existing companies kind of view Bitcoin as a risk, and yet your company is in here. You have a merchant bank model. Can you kind of explain to our listeners how a merchant bank works?
Merchant banking is investment banking with a twist. Basically, what we do is we take equity positions in our clients and help them grow to the next level of size. And that sometimes requires capital, that sometimes requires management expertise, often it requires both. So merchant banking is a focus on that. Investment bankers basically raise money for public companies. We take a long-term equity position in our clients and help them to go to another level. And we feel that the Bitcoin space is particularly appropriate for that. There's a lot of small, young companies getting into the Bitcoin space, largely run by tech-savvy youngsters who don't have a lot of experience in running a business. And we feel that we can help on that side, and we can help them raise capital to get to another level.
Is there any reason surrounding Bitcoin or cryptocurrency that has Greenbank formed out of Canada as opposed to the U.S.? Because I know you're a U.S. citizen, and yet this is a Canadian institution, right?
That's correct. I'm a U.S. citizen, but I'm now a resident of Canada for the last 3 years. I live in Toronto, and I moved to Toronto because I wanted to get into the natural resource space initially. And the reason I wanted to do that was because I wanted to get away from fiat currency. The US dollar has declined 95% in my lifetime. That's not a very good track record. And I feel that the right thing to do is to make investments in hard assets, gold, silver, and now Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin is digital gold. It has the same attributes as gold in terms of finite amount of the asset and being totally unaffected by fiat money printing by the central banks and the major countries who have a tendency to print money to resolve their debt problems. They don't solve their debt problems by reducing their debt. They solve their debt problems by printing paper currencies. And clearly, since the world is stuck with a system whereby paper currencies are the medium of exchange worldwide, if there's a possibility of a new currency that doesn't have the same attributes as fiat currencies, that is independent, that has relatively small cost in transactional terms, that can cross international boundaries, that bypasses the banking system, and that's clearly for me Bitcoin, then I don't see how we cannot get in that space. I believe Bitcoin is a revolution in the financial payment system. I think it will transform the financial system over the next decade. I think it's a major threat to the banking system because over $7 trillion worth of fiat currencies goes through the banking system simply being moved from one location to another location. And the banking system charges huge fees for the luxury of moving that money around. I can do the same transactions using Bitcoin, and the costs are infinitesimally small, and the speed is incredibly faster.
So basically, you've just identified Bitcoin as something that is a more efficient way of doing it, and therefore it makes sense to get involved before everybody else realizes that too.
That's correct. As I said, it's digital gold in my judgment. It has the same attributes plus a great deal more. And the main thing is it's not affected by money printing and inflationary trends. You know, the whole world is printing money like crazy. It's a race to the bottom in my judgment. It cannot continue in a positive way. I think if there's an alternative, and Bitcoin is that alternative, then I don't see how we cannot get in that space. I think it's a very dramatic space. I think it will increase significantly over the next few years, and we want to be in it.
Have you made any cryptocurrency investments besides Bitcoin, or is it purely Bitcoin for you?
For the moment, it's Bitcoin. We're not turning away the possibility of investing in other coins like Litecoin and others. As you know, there are lots of currencies out there, cryptocurrencies. I don't believe that most of them will survive. I think you will have 2 or 3 survivors. The main thing about a currency is it needs to be widely adopted. I don't see how you can adopt dozens of different currencies on a worldwide basis. So I think you'll end up with 2 or 3 currencies that will be the winners. Whether you like it or not, Bitcoin is definitely one of them. It's like the early days of Windows. You may have critique about what Windows does, and the latest versions of Windows have generated lots of criticism. But the fact of the matter is most of the world is on that operating system. When you have widespread adoption like that, it's basically a fait accompli. I think the same applies with Bitcoin. It is and will continue to be, in my judgment, the number one cryptocurrencies, which is not to say that others won't also have a part to play.
Let me push back on you a little bit with this. I agree with you about the momentum thing, you know, where once people get used to using something, then they're more likely to keep using that unless there's a really good reason to change. But at the same time, something like Windows, for example, you know, my mother recently switched from Mac to Windows and was not happy with the transition. This was switching to Windows 8 too, which is supposed to be very, very new user friendly. The only element that I think is missing from your analysis is the lock-in factor. I don't see a tremendous amount of lock-in when it comes to Bitcoin relative to other cryptocurrencies, whereas the barrier from switching from Windows, if that's all you've been using, to anything else, and what few options you have available, is quite substantial.
I agree with that switching analysis, but I do think that widespread usage is the key to any currency. And I think Bitcoin is way ahead of the game in terms of widespread usage, which is still not to say that it's not early days. It clearly is early days for Bitcoin, as it is for cryptocurrencies. But Bitcoin is by far and away the most widely utilized cryptocurrency. And the fact that it's getting mainstream acceptance, like, for example, Overstock.com recently started accepting Bitcoin. They took $130,000 on their first day in the States. When you get that kind of widespread usage, it's very hard to turn the clock back and say, well, wait a minute, I have a cryptocurrency too, and it's got a better attribute.
So let's take a step back from Bitcoin and cryptocurrency for a second and talk about investing in spaces like this, because you said that the other area that you invest in is in gold and silver, hard assets. What's different about looking at a gold or silver company or any sort of thing that you would want to invest in on that side of it relative to looking at some type of investment on the Bitcoin side of the companies? That, you know, what are the differences in how you assess those things?
Well, gold and currency have their part to play, and basically they've been around for centuries, and what they represent is a medium of exchange that holds its value and that has a finite amount in existence. It's hard to mine gold and silver. It's expensive to mine gold and silver. Therefore, the process of taking it out of the ground has established in itself a value of some description. But ultimately, the value is a function of usage, and why people take it on is because they see it as a way of retaining value at a time when paper currencies continue to depreciate, and a 95% reduction in the purchasing power of the dollar is a perfect example. The additional attributes of Bitcoin are that it has the same qualities of gold and silver in terms of retaining its purchasing power, irrespective of how much money printing is going on in fiat currency terms. But it's also a methodology of transferring wealth from one location to another. It's hard to take a gold bar and take it across international borders and give it to somebody as a medium of payment. Not impossible, but hard. Bitcoin takes minutes to do the same transaction across international borders, costs very little, bypasses all currency controls, and in addition is anonymous and comparatively easy to utilize. You don't need to be part of the banking system. There are hundreds of millions of people worldwide that are not part of the banking system, but do have a mobile phone. So all they need is a Bitcoin wallet, which you can obtain online relatively easily. You need to be able to buy some Bitcoin, obviously, but you can also receive Bitcoin from someone else. So either in buying or receiving Bitcoin with a mobile phone, they bypass the banking system. They can either send or receive value relatively quickly and very inexpensively. That's a huge attribute which gold and silver do not have. So clearly there are other attributes to Bitcoin that gold and silver don't have, which is not to detract from gold and silver. They have a part to play too.
Bitcoin 2.0 has become something of a buzzword lately. You know, as we talked about earlier, this doesn't suggest that Bitcoin is going to be overtaken by something like Litecoin, which is superficially different, but basically identical once you look under the hood. What do you think about the money plus cryptocurrencies like the Mastercoin protocol, BitShares, Ethereum, NXT, eMuni, Counterparty, and it seems like there are more every day. Do you have any thoughts about any of these or the Metacoin movement in general?
I think they're fascinating. I think they represent the next generation of how the Bitcoin network will be utilized. And I think that's another reason why Bitcoin will continue to be the market leader in the cryptocurrency space. Basically, you do have in existence a worldwide network, which not only can be utilized for money transmission by way of Bitcoin, but can also clearly be utilized for other things. And that's happening as we speak. There will be other methodologies of attaching things like contracts and verification of deals and all sorts of possibilities to the Bitcoin network. I think that will happen. And I think it's like the early days of the internet, whereby before HTML, people were scratching their head to figure out how we can use this new medium. And when HTML came along, all of a sudden it's become the norm. People don't think twice about it anymore.
One of the new technologies that's kind of coming in these cryptocurrency 2.0 implementations is the ability to create custom cryptocurrencies that don't necessarily have to try and do everything that Bitcoin does. Bitcoin represents a very broad market. You can think of it as representing the global market for cryptocurrencies almost, because it's the primary highway into and out of them. But there's this idea that you can issue company-specific cryptocurrency that basically acts as an equity token, through which you can basically do all of the things that you can do in a conventional stock market, but that doesn't have the barrier to entry. Now, this is probably illegal, of course, but in much the same way that Bitcoin is probably, quote-unquote, illegal just because it doesn't fit within the current paradigm. You know, you have a lot of experience in things like reverse mergers and have been in this space for quite a while. I'm wondering, do you think that this is going to be an important innovation to the world, or is this just local to Bitcoin?
I think it's important innovation. I'm not sure I agree with you about the illegality aspect of it. It's just that most governmental regulations just don't know how to deal with Bitcoin. It doesn't fit under any parameter that they're used to seeing. The US particularly is struggling with money transmission rules. There are 48 states that require licenses for money transmission, as well as a federal requirement. Just to get the ability technically to be legal takes an awful long time and an awful lot of money. So technically speaking, a lot of the transactions that would be occurring today in the States are quote-unquote illegal because they don't have a money transmission license. But even when you make application, even if one makes application through the system, the regulators themselves don't quite know how to deal with the application because they have no experience on Bitcoin. So it's a learning curve for everybody concerned. I think regulation will come. I think it's to be welcomed, not to be concerned about. I think taxation will come. I think that's fine too. There's no reason transactions can't be taxed. But the bottom line is Bitcoin is here to stay. In terms of your other question about other cryptocurrencies having very specific usages from a corporate perspective, that may or may not take hold. I'm not certain about it. You certainly can't behave like a stock market without being regulated like a stock market. So those hurdles have to be crossed. So these are good, innovative ideas, but it's too early to make a judgment, I think.
The last question is about regulation. You know, you said that it's a good thing, and I think that I agree with you on that. Any sort of certainty, whether rules are good or bad, it's probably better than no rules at all. Can you paint a picture for us? Where do you think we're going to find ourselves, just in terms of the ecosystem and how regulation plays into that in a year or 5 years, whichever one you'd like to pick?
Well, I think it's a disadvantage to the Bitcoin space to have all this constant stream of bad news with bad players being either arrested because they're dealing with drugs through Bitcoin, or their online exchanges are crumbling for one reason or another, or Bitcoin wallets get hacked into and the Bitcoin is stolen. All these things are negative vibes for Bitcoin, and we need to get over that early stage scenario, and we will. The systems will improve, the security will improve, and I think what will also improve is the regulatory framework within which Bitcoin can operate. I'm not one of those who profess to say, no rules are good rules. I think, on the contrary, I think we need to be working in a regulated environment. I don't think we need to be in opposition to government. I think we need to be working with government, and I think that will happen. And it's inevitable, and I think it should be welcomed. What's the timescale? I would guess within the next 2 years, most central banking systems and most governmental authorities will get their head around the Bitcoin space and introduce legislation one way or another to control it. I think as long as Bitcoin is accepted for what it is, a cryptocurrency in opposition to or in competitive terms with fiat currencies, the fact that it has to be regulated, I don't think is a threat. I think it should be welcomed. Once that certainty framework is in existence, I think the widespread adoption worldwide will accelerate dramatically. And with widespread adoption, you will get price increases for Bitcoin, because the more it's utilized, as it's a finite quality, the more the price will go up, which is, I think, why the price of Bitcoin in 2013 went up so dramatically from the teens to over $1,000, although clearly it's had a pullback since then. But I think that long-term price increase will continue because you do have a finite asset, and as it's more and more widely utilized, naturally speaking, the price will tend to go up.
Danny, it's been really great having you on. I appreciate you sharing your perspective with us. Let's get back to Greenbank for just a second. I know that you've got a project that you're working on. Can you share that with us?
Yes, we're in the process of raising $5 billion in a secured convertible debenture for our two Bitcoin companies. The monies will be utilized equally between investing in Bitcoin and investing in Bitcoin startups. And our intention is, at an appropriate time, to convert that debenture into common stock of our two subsidiaries and then spin those out as standalone public companies on the CSE. So it's a very unique way of getting into the Bitcoin space. And we believe for accredited investors, which is what we're focused on, this will be a really good way to get into our diversified Bitcoin portfolio, with ultimate liquidity being available because they'll have free trading public stock when and if we spin it off. And our objective is to spin those companies off on or before December 2015, and time will tell as to when exactly we will do that. We think once we raise the money, we'll invest it relatively quickly, and once we invest it, we feel that we're going to be moving forward to a public listing scenario.
So now, to be clear, I am not an accredited investor, so I can't do this, but for someone who is and would like to see a prospectus, is there a site to go to?
Yes, you can go to our website, greenbankcapitalinc.com, and the documentation is on there, and you can download it and look at it. Also, if you're not an accredited investor and you want to have a little piece of us, we are a public company. You can buy our stock, symbol is GBC, and it's a way of indirectly participating in our Bitcoin investments.
Danny Wetridge, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
This is Chris Joseph bringing you news on Next, the first true second-generation cryptocurrency for March 11th, 2014. Elections were held this past week to select community members for 3 committees, one dedicated to Next infrastructure, one for Next technical development, and one dedicated to Next marketing. Elected members for these committees are now getting set up to help manage project and bounty funds for Next projects. Anyone with a project proposal can apply to these committees for funding. The committees will assess the submitted proposal and vote to award funds for projects. In other news, testing on the Next decentralized asset exchange is continuing. As confidence in the exchange grows, a release date within the next month or so is becoming very likely. For more general information on Next, head to nextcrypto.org or mynxt.org. And stay tuned for more news on Next in the next Let's Talk Bitcoin broadcast.